Yeah. All right. I think we're getting started. That post-lunch sort of pace, so we might have a couple more people wander in as we get going. But thanks for coming today. So this is Teaching with Qualitative Research and Data Success Stories. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Bill Harder. I'm the Research Lab Manager over in the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning. And I'm thankful to be joined today by Richard Bennett from the Justice Law and Criminology Department.
Hey guys.
And
hey,
Aaron Boesenecker from School of International Service. So before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the motivation for this panel. I took over the research lab in CTRL a little more than about a year and a half ago, but I've been around AU significantly longer than that. And one of my goals when we started this, when I took over the lab, was to really increase the amount of support that we do for qualitative research to help with increase the quantity of it, but also the quality going on at AU. And that's both individual research done by faculty members, but also being able to integrate this into your teaching, into your coursework. You know, when people think about CTRL, in a lot of ways, they think in terms of sort of where the people that come in and do STATA or SPSS workshops in your classes. And that type of sort of getting your hands dirty with actual data and experiential learning, you know, pedagogically teaches a lot of really important lessons sort of about the logistics of working with actual data and conducting real research, how ugly data coding can be at times, and just, you know, really serves to tie together sort of abstract principles from course content into the real world examples. And, you know, in a lot of ways, we traditionally think about that in terms of quantitative data, but the same sort of approach can be used with qualitative data, whether it's archival documents, sort of text-based interviews, speech transcripts, audio, video files, social media data, or survey research, things like that. And so I wanted to put together this panel to have some people that are doing that in their classes in really, I think, inventive, original, and useful ways. So that's sort of the motivation for putting this together. I'd like you guys to hear from each of these gentlemen about how they incorporate it in their classes. But before I turn it over to them, just a quick note on sort of what my team can do for you guys. And as you you know, hear from them, and you can think about how this can be incorporated into your own classes, be aware of what I can do for you. So my team puts on a series of about 30 workshops a semester on research-related software. So we do all the SPSS, STATA, SAS, R, things like that. But we also do workshops on more qualitative tools, survey research with Qualtrics, and in vivo, which is sort of our premier qualitative analysis software at AU. In addition to those general workshops, which you can find schedules of on the back table, we're also happy to come into your classes and do really tailored workshops that fit with what you're teaching, what the learning objectives are for your courses. If you want to focus on specific methodologies, if you want to use a specific type of data, my team's really happy to work with you and figure out how to get the most out of this for your class. We'll also provide help in finding sort of sample data that if you want to build into your class. We know the sort of databases and repositories that we can find this type of thing for you. And finally, you know, we'll offer one-on-one consultations. Many of you probably know Asena Senov and Angel Bogashev, who are the other two full-time members of the research support group. They're economists by training and handle a lot of the quantitative side. I'm a political scientist, more mixed methods by training, so I'm happy to talk to you about this type of qualitative research. I should also point out Runjana Das is in the audience today, who is a PhD candidate in SIS, who also works with in vivo and a lot of the qualitative side of things from RSG. So we're happy to sit down and have a discussion with you from sort of you know, big picture conceptual approaches to more even really specific sort of assignment design about how we can incorporate this into an existing class. So with that, I'm actually gonna turn it over to Aaron, if you'd like to go first, and take us through how you approach this.
All right. If you could just shoot me that clicker.
Yeah.
And oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's tough. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Bill. So I'm going to give an overview of how we've done kind of the things that Bill just discussed in a particular course that I teach, which is the Advanced International Studies Research course, or what we call SISU 306. I'll tell you more about what that is in just a second, but it's a course in which over the course of a couple of years now, I guess, or a couple of different spring terms, we've integrated the use of in vivo for our students who are completing at the sophomore level, the second year level, their first major original research project. And it's been a continual work in progress. We've learned a lot along the way. We're still making it better, but it really has done some really cool things for the possibilities for students and for me as a faculty member to work with students in that vein of experiential learning and drawing on the resources that CTRL offers. So I'll give you a quick overview of what that course is about so you understand the context. I'll give a few examples of what we do and kind of what has worked and what we're still thinking about and things like that. And then I'm happy to discuss more than that in the questions and answers. So this course, this SASU 306 course that we have, to put that into context, it's the second course of a 2-semester methods and methodology sequence that all SIS students take in their second year. So prior to this course, they've had SASU 206, which is a course that primarily covers research design and introduces students into different methodologies, big, broad tent worlds of methodology, statistical research, kind of qualitative case study research, and then non-positivist, if you will, qualitative research, think discourse analysis or things like that. And that's what this course, the version of this course that I teach actually does. So they come into this course having some sense of methodology and research design, and they've been working with the topic for a semester already. So they've got some of those things in place as they enter the course. The idea is that across these sections of 306, there's different methodological foci. So some sections do statistical research, some do other types. My sections are on discourse analysis, and the idea here when I started working with Bill and his team was to really think about how can we deepen the students' knowledge and skill base in doing this and get them better projects in the end by doing something with in vivo, which also allows us to introduce students to things that they think or they're not sure that they could possibly do already at the second year or sophomore level. So the fundamental goal of any section of this course is for students to produce their first original research project. That's think about a 10,000 word, could be published potentially in a journal type quality project with original research analysis of data. And in this case, it's heavily based on analysis of textual data, visual images as well, and some other things, given the discourse analysis focus of my own sections. So how did I go about working with Bill, or how did we work together to kind of integrate what CTRL offers into what was already existing as a core required course for our SAS students? Again, my own sections focus on this notion of post-structuralist discourse analysis. So what that means in practical terms for what we were talking about is finding ways for students to really engage deeply and systematically with texts. Find some original texts and read them, and do more than just read them, but figure out how to systematically kind of code and analyze and draw out the kinds of meanings that are being constructed there, the kind of symbols, the kind of logics that are inherent in these texts. So how do you work with that type of data in depth and bring something meaningful out of it? What eventually unfolded, I'll show you some examples from my syllabus here in a second, was kind of a scaffolded approach where we integrate the learning of the theory with the learning of the software. So these two things can't exist separately, but rather understanding first what discourse analysis is all about, what that theory is, how you go about it, informs why we do certain things in the software when we get in the lab, and putting those things into practice, having to click through documents or code nodes, highlight things, goes back and reinforces the theory of why we're analyzing things in a particular way. And so in general, what we would do is kind of balance lab sessions with in-class workshops that I would do with my own section, with preparatory sessions. So there's kind of an iterative process of learning the theory, trying it out with your own data, going back, trying it again, learning the next step, going back to the lab, trying it, and so on. And we did that in about, I think, 5 cycles in the last term. I'll show you the example here in a second. So those in-class workshops that we have set up lab sessions where we physically take the whole class over to Bill's lab, sit down in front of computers, get into in vivo, and after the very first introductory section, students are working with their own data in each of those sessions. There might be a sample project that Bill uses to illustrate a couple of principles, and then it's, okay, you go and do it while we're here, and you're going to make some concrete progress on your project. And you're probably going to realize that when we come back next time, you're going to have to undo some things and redo some things and keep working in that sense in the very iterative nature of research. Now, I'll say up front that Bill and his team are excellent, and one thing that really made this possible was a lot of close communication and coordination in advance. And I'll come back to this, to the lessons learned. We've started talking about already, this coming spring sections now a little bit, and thinking about how we would do these things, because it's not just about scheduling the lab session, of course, but about thinking about how does this all fit together pedagogically into what we're doing. What's the best order to do things? What should students be doing in the classroom before they come to the lab? What's the logical next step afterwards? So it's kind of a seamless research process. And so all of this adds up to the fact that it wasn't just about, okay, we're going to go and learn a little bit about in vivo as a neat computer program, and you're going to do this research project, but it's a holistic thing that we kind of designed. Here's a couple of shots from just the broad overview of the course for my syllabus. And you'll see we start out with, in the first couple of weeks, kind of the theory, the history, the basic stuff you would expect in a research seminar where students have a topic in mind, but now they're starting to think about how do I really research this systematically. But come around here, where are we? Mid-February, we get into the lab session for the first time, and that's an introduction into in vivo, and they start working with the program. Prior to that, I've actually brought Bill into the classroom to help everybody set up laptops and things like that so they have access to the virtual computing lab, so they've installed in vivo on their laptops and things like that. So everyone's ready to go with all the technology, so these lab sessions are actually substantive and not troubleshooting. Now there's invariably lots of troubleshooting that comes up along the way, but we want them to be substantive in that sense. But then it really takes off in the second part of the course, where you see here after spring break, almost every week has a workshop followed by a lab session, and then a workshop followed by a lab session, and kind of a cycle for the the Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday way we set up courses here. And so that in this particular iteration, Tuesday was a workshop in class where we got stuff ready. Friday was the lab session. The expectation was over the weekend and in preparation for the next week. They're working on their own projects, and then we come back and have another workshop. In this, you don't have all the stuff listed out, but once we get into the second part of the class, there's very few assigned readings for the students. It's really do these things that we're working on in the workshop, and when you go back and have your own time, work on those things. You're not throwing another PDF at you isn't going to help you at this point in time. It's individual research. So it's very hands-on. And then, one sees as we get into the workshops and the lab sessions throughout there, it quickly becomes, evident whether students are maybe struggling or lagging a bit or kind of keeping up with all of this. And so we work with them along the way. All this adds up to a final project and research paper. So it's this very kind of systematic, structured approach. What do we get out of it? I think these are the key things that I've noticed since we've started doing this. First off, definitely the research quality has increased, and I would say specifically the validity and the reliability of the research has increased. Not only is there a digital file the students use in vivo and have like a digital record of what they've been doing and how they've been analyzing things, so it's not kind of a, oh, I read this stuff and here's my analysis type thing. But they're much more attuned because they're constantly doing this in the program in terms of tracking their own decisions, being kind of thoughtful about why they're coding things in a certain way, writing that down, journaling, memoing, that kind of stuff that's really important. It certainly reinforces that research is an iterative process. They'll do things, and then they'll have to go back and undo things, and then recode and things like that. That comes with its own set of frustrations as part of the learning process, but it's also a very important process about teaching students and working with them in real research. It's actual, experiential learning, and in that sense, students report after the fact, despite all the frustrations, that it's quite empowering, that they really have something that they've created that they can point to with visuals and graphics and an analysis, and they go on to do things with these projects. I think it's important. It helps socialize students into the discipline as well. We're doing research in these sessions like we really do research as faculty or as grad students or whatever the case might be. And it helps distinguish how this is systematic research as distinct from the kind of fact-finding report writing that students are often used to even up into the first year of college, right? This is something new and different. And it is real tangible skill building. I mean, it's about the learning and the conceptual elements so much, but students go on to report that they use these things in their internships. They use these things to get jobs. They can write down some in vivo competency on a CV or a resume, and that is important as well in terms of being able to put this into practice and take it beyond the classroom. So I have a couple of examples here of data visualizations. These aren't going to make any sense if you don't know the projects behind them, but I just want to show a few other things in terms of the value added here. Students start to really work with data visualizations. This is a diagram showing cases and nodes from in vivo where the circles with the 4 colors in it is a case, an object of analysis, and the other blue bubbles are themes or kind of qualitative aspects associated with them. This probably doesn't make any sense again as you read it, but it's from a project from a student, Shana Vassar, who analyzed Soviet animated cartoons. And these cartoons at different periods in time, pre and post end of the Cold War, portrayed women in different ways. And so the project title was Women in Red, Femininity and Womanhood in Soviet Animation. And she found important shifts in the way that animated cartoons, which are a very common medium in Central and Eastern European states, illustrated women and their roles and the aspects of femininity. And she could then capture this visually. She went on to produce a wonderful poster with this in a few of these diagrams. Here again, pre-1989, certain aspects are associated with it, post-1989, other ones. And this is just more than saying, qualitative research is about reporting a bunch of words. You can generate great graphics and visualizations, and they did more than this. Here's another one from a different project on faith groups and environmentalism and the different themes that are associated with different types of faith groups. And these are only a couple of examples of the types of visualizations and analytical output that you can get. So, the use of in vivo offers a lot of value add in itself as we work students through it, but then they also can capture and express and discuss the things they've been working with, this rich qualitative data, in a much better format than just handing somebody a paper, which, of course, they also do with all of this, but it helps a lot in the overall construction of the research project, and it helps it make it very real and tangible for the students. So to wrap up, just a couple of ideas about what we really think works on this, and I think things that we're still working on. In terms of successes, we've certainly seen growth in the number of students who take their research from my particular sections, but also from our other sections of 306 that work with technology, and go on to publish them or present them at national conferences or other kind of events. Many of you might have heard of Clocks and Clouds, which is published here on campus. We have students published in here. I think some of the students that came out of my most recent sections are candidates to go to the National Conference in Undergraduate Research next year. That means they're going there as juniors, not waiting until their senior capstone project, and that's a pretty cool thing. So there's lots of these follow-on opportunities. Even those that don't publish and present will take what they've started in this class. For example, that environmental project that I just showed you, that student's going abroad this year, and she's going to continue to work on these themes by interviewing people that she couldn't get to from here and build on that project now that she has a foundation, a conceptual framework that she started with analyzing the original source text that she works with. Students, like I say, there's a general sense of accomplishment here. You've really created something real. And for me, it's learning with my students. I was not at all an in vivo expert 2 years ago when we started this, or 3 years ago, and now, when we puzzle through things together, that also shows students that I'm doing some research too, and that's important, in terms of a learning experience. Now, some challenges. Computer literacy is certainly one that we still kind of grapple with a little bit. We kind of imagine our undergraduates to be tech savvy, but ask them to change the default font on Word or something like that, and their head explodes. And so I've had to encounter some expectation adjustment there in terms of what students know. They're very savvy, of course, with social media and anything tablet and platform-based. They're not so savvy with things that we would think of as traditional programs. And so we've had to build in a little bit more learning the program. How do I click through in vivo? How do I do those things into the course? Doing that, oftentimes students will become overly focused on the technology and forget that they're doing a research project. And so we have to bring them back into the world of, okay, this is research with text, and it's not just about learning the program. And so we're still balancing that, making sure that we have clear requirements in terms of what we want to do, and balance those with limitations. There's many more things they could do in vivo than what they can do in a semester, and sometimes they might have this idea, but we can't get there in a term. So managing those expectations appropriately to get them through that. And I think we learned this past semester in particular, it can be a pretty time-intensive thing for the CTRL staff as well. So thinking about the best way to manage, we've talked about kind of different consultations, office hours, support, and things like that. So it's a fair and equitable balance of work for everyone involved. And so students know where to go to get the assistance they need at different points in time is pretty important as well. So that's a really kind of a rough overview of what we've done. There's a concluding slide. There's, again, that's Shana on the left. She's presenting her research at our SIS Undergraduate Research Symposium, where she and the other panelists who had similar qualitative projects just received accolades for what they did from the graduate students and faculty who were evaluating their papers. It's an example of what students feel empowered to do, and she herself said, I would have never thought I could do this before, and then having worked through the process, all of a sudden I realized what I had. And invariably, 80% of the students at the end of the term say, or can I write more? Whereas when they start the term, they're like, there's no way I'll write a 20-page paper. So we get there, and this helps a lot, especially due to the support of Bill and his team. So that's my overview. Happy to answer more questions when we get to that point.
Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you.
And we'll pass off.
Oh,
yeah, great, yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's good, we start there. Hi, good afternoon to everyone. Let me tell you a little bit about the class where we originated this. But I want to reiterate, first of all, if you need help in doing anything with students or research, he's the guy to go to. And his lab it's been just amazing, the work that he's done. And he continues to do it. I'm teaching in the fall, I'm teaching a research methods class, 280. And we've already scheduled one time to do Qualtrics and the next time to learn it, in this particular case, SPSS. So he's a great person to go to. Let me tell you a little bit about the class. It was an honors class. It was honors 210, which was called burden of proof. And in the old days, honors classes were team taught. I'm saying the old days, 3 years ago. Earlier than that, for some of you sitting here, you know how they were taught. They were just taught as an H class. But this was a class where they tried team teaching. And it was called burden of proof. There were 3 of us. Myself did criminology and criminal justice. Jim Gerard, who is a world-renowned expert on criminalistics. I mean, half his time is here at AU and half his time is around the United States testifying about various evidence. He did the forensic chemistry, and then Betty Malloy, who's over the stat department, did all the statistics. Because we have any work with statistics and talk about what's the probability if you have this blood type or this DNA, it is actually related to the person that you're interested in. So they had to do 3 labs. 2 were wet labs. One was called On the Money, which basically they collected money and saw how much cocaine or stuff was on it. Yeah. The other was fingerprints, where they did their own fingerprints and checked it with others. And then the 3rd lab is they called it a dry lab. You know, I'm going, okay, I'm not a chemist. You call it a dry lab, I call it a research project. And they were allowed to do what they wanted, but it had to be a research project where they went out, looked at data, analyzed those data, and then presented the paper. One of the things that I said is, look guys, if you're interested, we can do a survey on campus, all right, talking about fear of crime and inclusiveness. And that's what my team was, okay? The first thing we needed to do was get something that was really of interest to the students. And I think what you'll find if I'm going to do a research program today, what do you think would be on? What's happening in Charlottesville? What's happening across the United States? How is it affecting campuses? Oh yeah, that would be the topic. And the reason is you want to get them involved and engaged in the research project. So, at the particular time, there were issues of campus police abuse in California. If you remember at Berkeley, yes. They were spraying demonstrators. I mean, not just spraying. I mean, we're this far away, and I've got a huge canister, and I'm spraying students, okay? And then the recent closure of Washington College in Maryland, and the idea of fear of victimization. You remember that incident where a student at Washington College had kind of gone haywire, and his parents said, he's dangerous, he has a gun. I don't even remember. This is 2 years ago, by the way. Okay? And those with alternative lifestyles were fearful of attack. It started campus, as you know, because you've been on campus, and you've been following what basic things have been coming down from our new president, from Neil Kerwin, from the Dean of Students, the idea of inclusiveness. Okay, make the project appear legitimate. Okay? First of all, you have to develop a professional research proposal. So we had this extra class, these 18 students, by the way, who decided to do it, not only had the regular class periods, but they had labs with me. And labs with me is where I went through the entire research project. The first part was, how do you develop a professional proposal? So we did that. And then hold a kickoff meeting with stakeholders. Again, this is what you always do in federal contracts. You know, you get together with the kickoff meeting. So I had all the students there. They had part of the proposal. They had to present and talk about methodology to the stakeholders. And the stakeholders were basically representatives from campus police and the Office of Research and Assessment. Okay? And they gave these presentations. Again, getting the feeling that, number one, this was a legitimate project, and number two, it was an important project to be involved in and had real-life implications. Okay, let's go through the whole process. Well, the first thing you have to do if you're going to use human subjects is what? Get IRB approval. How do you get IRB approval? You have to be certified. So they went through the online CTI certification. Then we trained them, and this is where Bill came in. We had a class on Qualtrics, the basic understanding of Qualtrics. He has some very good examples, by the way. So if you want to go in and have your class, learn something about Qualtrics, working with his example and working through is great. And then we had him use SPSS software. I know there are all other sorts of softwares available, but I think still today SPSS is probably the most common one that you find in governmental organizations where most of these kids are going to work. Okay? Okay, participants were divided in teams based upon their expressed interest to increase their engagement in the project. Okay? They came up with these teams. They came up with what they thought was really important, and they broke up into 4. The fear of crime, again, fear of crime on campus, fear of crime off campus. Does it change your behavior? Do you think that your fear of crime is reduced because of the quality of our campus security, etc.? Inclusiveness. Again, this is how inclusive do people feel in the classroom, on campus, in student activities, all these areas that each group identified as where, let's say, inclusiveness made a difference. Crime reporting group, do students report these things? You know, one of the things that we know from the general survey population is that only about 1/3 of the incidents that happen, the criminal incidents happen, are ever reported to the police. Okay, what about on campus? I mean, do we have the same thing here? And then finally, social media. One group said, you know, we really have to get social media involved to see if that's a way in which we can build inclusiveness, transmit crime, crime reporting, etc. Okay, and then each group focused on the literature and created the creation of their survey instruments. Okay, then, as I said, every week I would hold a session talking about a different aspect of research. And we talked about, you know, the idea of what are the central concepts in each one of the 4 areas, what measurement protocols are they interested in. The class reviewed each one of these sub-proposals and critiqued the sub-proposals, all right? So group 1, fear of crime, would come and say, this is what the literature says, this is where you think of the important concepts, this is the way you want to measure them. And then the rest of the class would say, well, you know, I think we should do this, I think we should do that. One of the things that really got me, and this is because I'm an old timer, you know, in the old days, gender was male, female, other. Do you know that there are 23 different variations of gender identity? Did you know that? I didn't. This was great. I learned something. You know, we were talking about the faculty learned something. I said, my God, this is great. What they had to do is they had to learn skip patterns. So if you said this category, like Latina, well, what is your identity under Latina? So it's really interesting in terms of the skip patterns they learned. Okay, where survey questions were constructed in quad, and specific attention was paid to skip patterns, because we would ask them, have you been a victim? Okay? And if you had been a victim, then we started asking you questions about that victimization. If you had, you skipped over. We also, and this is something the students were really good at, and I think they got this out of dealing with the human subjects. What if the person says, yes, I was a victim of sexual attack? Well, is that allowing the person to relive that incident? Well, very possibly, yes. So after each one of the ones, if you said yes to something like that, immediately it came up talking about the services offered at AU and a telephone number you could call. And this was part of the skip pattern. And this came out of the group saying, well, no, I'm uneasy about asking these questions. Well, if you think it might be reliving, is there something we can do? And again, it gets back to the idea of the balance between, you know, the need to know and the impact on human subjects. We had to weigh that, and the students weighed it. You know, do we really need to know if a person was sexually assaulted on campus? Well, probably so. Well, but then what weight does that have in terms of the impact upon a human subject? How can you try to alleviate or at least minimize that type of attack? Okay? Pre-tested by class and all incorporated back. The sample was generated by the Office of Research and Assessment. David Calb, great guy. I don't know if you know him, but if you need anything, talk to David. He's a great guy. Not as great as Bill, but pretty. Okay. Okay, we advertised. I should have brought one, I forgot. We put a really interesting flyer together. One of the students in the group was also studying graphic arts. to put this wonderful flyer together. It went in all the dormitories, bulletin boards on campus, et cetera, et cetera. They developed an introductory letter to be attached to the field instrument. Survey was fielded, the response window was open for 2 weeks, follow-up email after the first week. We had a response rate of 28%. That's horrible, as far as I'm concerned. David Couch says, how did you do that? Because it appears that when it comes from AU, you just don't answer the questions. You just click delete. So we got that, but in my field, 28%, you can't say much about anything. But that's the way it was. Interesting, again, lessons learned, exactly what you said. The idea of computer literacy. They were literate on very small platforms, but when it came to the larger platforms, they had to learn. And they had some problems. But they came back again and again to your shop, and you helped them again and again, figuring out skip patterns and things like that. And finally, I think they learned it. They had a skill. They can put it on their resume that they've conducted survey research. They spent a lot of time with me going over sampling. This was something that was probably a little above their head, but I think they understood how we were doing it. It was a stratified random sample. The stratification was on 2 things, on gender and also on year. We looked at undergraduates and graduate students. So they're stratified on 2, and within those strata, we had random sampling. Great experience. I loved it. And publishable papers came out. Not published, but publishable papers. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
So originally when we had proposed this panel, there was also a third member on it who was Jane Palmer, who's the director of the Community-Based Research Scholars. Unfortunately, she's not able to be here today, but I'd be remiss if we didn't at least talk about that program for a little bit, given that their mission is really exactly the type of things that we're talking about today. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the program, it's basically a living learning community based around service learning, but also this type of actual hands-on research. What it does is it takes a cohort of first-year students that have an interest in public service and nonprofit work, and also in research. They live together, and they go through and take a series of classes that are, I believe, required during their first year, and optional classes that'll go through their sophomore year. But each cohort works with a particular DC-based nonprofit organization. They partner with that organization, learn about their missions, then actually go into the field, collect their own data, conduct interviews, focus groups, surveys, and use all this original data that they've collected to do a needs assessment of the community in question, and then turn that into actual actionable recommendations that are delivered to the nonprofit at a conference held here on campus. And so it's really sort of the crux of this type of students' experiential learning, working with data that they've collected themselves and interpreted themselves. And so, because Jane wasn't able to be here today, I just wanted to show, this is a brief 4-minute video that takes you through the program itself.
groups based on different interests. And then they're going to be presenting to you the findings related to those interests. So that's crime and safety, health and wellness, housing and homelessness, education, and issues affecting immigrant communities. Through our survey, we formulated the question, how do race, gender, and ward location influence public opinion on policing?
So this kind of highlights the disparity in the quality of education between the wards and how that affects whether or not people would like to send their children to public schools.
Well, the first issue that we looked at was the access to healthcare and access to Medicaid and Medicare, and where the respondents to the survey got their healthcare from. And
that we need to work on this long-term affordable housing in order to alleviate the current hardships that families in DC face and to start these families on a path of economic stability.
A lot of the existing city services, and to be honest, this includes UPO because you guys have been around for so long, they weren't set up to support the growing immigrant population. As you saw in one of our first slides, it has doubled, tripled in recent years. And so I think that in general, we can update our infrastructure to provide more for those immigrant populations.
And I want to say thank you to everyone who has contributed to this project, but you have no idea what a big help it is to us. I want you all, especially those of you all who are going to make a career of this, to understand how powerful the work that you have done and will continue to do and have when used correctly by an organization that really wants to make a
Yeah, and I think that the program itself echoes a lot of the things that you both said, particularly the amount of skill development. I mean, this is first semester freshmen engaging in conducting this type of research and coming away from it with really first of all just pure logistical skills that they're able to develop in the research process. That'll inform, the other 3 years that they'll spend here at AU, but also just an approach to thinking about research design broadly as well. And I think, we've all mentioned sort of this ability to take the skills developed in this and then translate and what that means to the additional classes that they'll take here at AU.
So I've not seen that video before, but as I watched it, I saw at least 3 students who later appeared in some of my upper division research courses, like the one I was just talking about, who did excellent work, and it's not a surprise. And at some point along the way, I'm sure I learned that they were in CBRS, but it just brought that back. I hadn't seen them in a year or two, and yeah, it certainly set them up well. At a very practical level, I know when students come into my research courses, if they've been through CBRS, they've already been exposed to human subjects research training, to ideas of ethics and research that are so critical, and that I think all of our first year students should get in more depth. But these students know that, and they're certified by CIPI already, often at a more extensive level than what we require in many of our general courses, and so that's a huge asset when they actually end up doing field work or something like that.
And I'd like to speak for Jane. Jane got her PhD with us, but the thing that makes her so appropriate for this is she has an MSW and worked with troubled youth in Chicago for 3 years. So she has that experience of working with governmental agencies, with nonprofits, etc. So I think she brings a wealth of knowledge, experience, and just humanity to the course she teaches. If you have a chance to meet Jane, please do so.
Great. So with that, I thought we could open it up and have more of a general discussion. Love to hear from you if you're engaged in any projects like this or see the potential in your classes. I am going to take the chair's prerogative and ask the first question. And we touched on this a little bit, but both of the projects that you have instigated in your classes are these large sort of multi-week projects that run throughout the length of the course. And I was wondering if you could both speak a little more about sort of the trade-off between teaching the raw analytic skills and working with the software and things like that, and finding that balance between the other learning objectives in the course and the other content areas.
Well, I'll speak to it. They were honor students. They were expected to really produce and spend a lot of time working together. Like the Jane's course, they live together at Hughes Hall. So they're working together. And on Wednesdays, I had them every Wednesday, going through the process of how you go about conducting research. And then, did I overdo it? The students didn't complain. I mean, maybe I did. They weren't complaining to me, and they weren't complaining to our TA. And our TA was a person who had gone through the course the year before and was very close to the new students. The balance, I think that they liked working with me more than they liked working with Jim Gerard. Jim Gerard is a great guy, don't get me wrong, but he's a forensic chemist. And this particular course, Honors 210, is a requirement for your science. So it was heavy science, heavy forensics. And the kids just went, when they got to DNA and going through all this nucleic acid and stuff, they just went wild. So I think I was a good balance. Now I think in my 280 class, which I'm teaching, I will not be as hard on the students because they do take other classes. But in this particular venue, the students love coming to talk about research and criminal justice and not talking about DNA and various types of accelerants in burning incidents or arson, all the ketones and all that stuff. So I don't. Yeah, I overdid it. Okay, I admit, I overdid it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because there is, in some sense, a trade-off, or at least to me, I think of it as kind of understanding the balance, and also, not just for me, but understanding it, but communicating to the students where the course fits in the curriculum. And so this sequence of courses that I described, the 2-semester methods and methodology sequence, did not exist in SIS 4 or 5 years ago. We rewrote our BA degree. It became a keystone for the second-year experience of students. Now, that means students coming into their second year don't have a ton of background knowledge on whatever it is they're choosing to research. They know they're really interested in, Soviet film or environmental movements or Iranian foreign policy or Nixon's a trip to China or something like that. They do not have a full range of background information, and then we're asking them to undertake a research project. So the conscious trade-off that we had to both grapple with, but then I'll explain why it makes sense, I think, was that these methods courses in this sequence is not about teaching content knowledge. It's about, or to the extent that it teaches content knowledge, it's gained through the process. These courses are about learning the research process. And along the way, if we're honest with ourselves, any good research project, we surprise ourselves and we learn something we didn't know along the way anyway. So it's not just about bringing all that content knowledge that you have onto a piece of paper. Now that was, I think, for a lot of faculty members, myself included, initially tough because we wanted to tell students the things that we thought they needed to know, but the course is really about letting them uncover and discover what's important in the areas they're researching, even if that means they go wrong. Even it's not going to be perfect anyway if it's not perfect at the end. It's much more about that process. Understand the process of asking a question to which you don't know the answer, following a set of procedures, both theoretical and kind of technical, analytical, to arrive at an answer, realize what you've missed along the way, file that away for the next class. And so, I still have to remind myself of this. We teach these courses as a faculty team with all these other methodologies, and we remind each other of this, that we're not teaching content, we're not providing facts, we're providing tools so that students can uncover some facts, and really understanding the process. That process is more important than the result at the end of the day. I think in the stats versions of this 306 course that are taught, there's hardly anybody that actually arrives at a statistically significant finding. So what? They've gone through the process and they've researched something. Here, a lot of my students will say, well, I can only say so much about this, that, or the other phenomenon or text or meaning that I've examined. It's like, well, you can say more about it now than you could before. You know the process, and now you have a bunch of excellent questions for your next thematic area courses where you go into more content and for your capstone. So that's the way I frame it. It's deliberately about the process. I'm certainly not an area expert in everything from Iranian politics to Soviet film to China and Nixon to everything else that 50 students a term are researching in these courses. So it is about that process and marshaling them through that.
Do you put them together as teams?
I do have them do some group work. They have individual projects at the end, but when we identify kind of commonalities, then I'll have them work on some stuff. You folks are doing foreign policy, you folks are doing kind of something environmental, but what else?
I have to work in teams because most research, as you know, is
Yeah.
at least the quantitative.
Sadly, not yet in the social sciences as much as it should be, but we're trying to push in that direction.
So I forced them into teams. Well, I didn't force them into teams. They got to come up with their topic areas, and then that formed the team. So some teams had more members than others.
Yeah.
Just to follow up on something you said there, I mean, I think it's a useful skill to know the limits of what you can say as well.
Yeah.
I mean, that shouldn't be undervalued to say,
No,
well, I
no.
can say this and only this,
Yeah.
right?
Students who have been socialized to have a definitive answer when given a question or a prompt find that very difficult. But that's part of the role of what we're doing.
So our politicians.
Yeah.
All right, I'd love to open it up if anybody has any questions or comments or insights about how you might.
Or any
work with
insights
this.
as to how we should do this differently.
Yeah.
I have a question for Aaron.
Sure.
You showed the syllabus for your class. I was just wondering, to what degree do you also go into discourse as a theory and go into different schools and talk about discourse versus discourse analysis and methodology?
Oh, the first third of the course is about discourse theory.
Right.
And I've had some exposure to it in the 206, the prior course, for a couple of weeks as well. And so, I mean, I locate the variant that I'm teaching them, which is primarily geared towards kind of readily accessible text, mostly the elite level type stuff, government documents and things like that, and post-structuralism. We locate that and how it's not critical discourse analysis and not, grammars and didactic markers and things like that, and how it's not other variants. And they don't know all of that coming in, so that's part of me drawing some boundaries for them. But we do that in the first couple of weeks, and there's also usually another session taught on critical discourse analysis. So if they decide they really are interested in sentence structure instead of what I'm doing, then they can migrate that way. So we do that in the first third with a lot of readings about the theory of, in the background, and kind of the history and evolution of the field, as muddy and messy as it is.
I gave general lectures and discussions on theory generation.
Yeah.
And then when the students would come to me and say, well, I'm really interested in theory of crime, how do I go about putting all these things together? Talking about relationships, scope conditions, things like that. So I gave them a general understanding of theory construction in the social sciences.
And also, if some students say expresses an interest in perhaps approaching a particular topic from, say, a critical race theory perspective or a feminist perspective, is there also a school for kind of integrating that into the course, or maybe that would be integrated as you go?
The students came up with those 4 areas that they were interested in. The inclusiveness one was the one that really focused on what you're talking about. How does gender identity, how does race play a role looking in the classroom? Questions like, do you feel that the professor in the class focuses or at least addresses issues of race and inclusiveness? What about contacts with campus security? What about the administration? What about in your dormitory space or in your living space? So they had a chance, and they did, really focus in on the idea of gender identity, racial identity, and how that would play out in terms of the inclusiveness of the economy.
Yeah.
But and in the 280 class, I let the students do the same thing. I let them come up with their topic. And then I scramble like hell to kind of try to read stuff. So I'm not an idiot when they ask me a question.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think today it's a lot different than it was, say, 20 years ago. The issues that are really important. I mean, the theme still might be inclusiveness in crime, but what are the factors that, do your faculty, is the program, the lectures, the curriculum really inclusive? 20 years ago, that was what? What do you mean inclusive? Now, you really have to do it because it's becoming a very important issue in our curriculum and a very important issue in political life. And if you don't cover it, I don't think you're doing a service to your students.
One other aspect that we do in the 306 course, in the first third, they also write a literature review for the projects, right? And so here's where they have the chance to choose, to examine and choose which kind of theoretical lenses, within the world of discourse theory itself, which kind of theoretical lenses they want to apply. And I kind of see two things. I see students who have gone through world politics who kind of take the critical view that I'm going to take the standard realist or liberalist frames and critique them using discourse to show how they don't really explain things. And then others might find either a feminist or other critical theory perspective that they want to actually take and apply in and of itself. And so, projects kind of go in those two directions. But it's in writing that lit review where they identify the lenses or the frameworks that will inform their broader, in the broad world of discourse analysis, the approach they take and the particular kind of symbols or meanings or ideas they want to deconstruct and analyze, things like that.
Yeah, I'll also add something that I sort of see from my vantage point of looking across sort of methodological classes at AU, right, is that there's always this tension in whether it's a quantitative or a qualitative class, looking at sort of as ourselves as researchers and knowing what the most appropriate methodological approach is for question A with data X, right, versus what a student at this point in their education has the tools to perform, right? So on the quantitative side, you have a student that goes through and they take their class and they learn up to OLS regression, right? But then they have questions that should be answered with X, Y, Z other models.
Inevitably, right?
Inevitably time series, or I have a dependent, binary dependent variable, right? And so if they show up at the end of the semester with a paper using a multinomial logit model, when you know that they know only a tenth of what it would take to get there, there's that central tension between a lot of the concepts that we're talking about are things that would be formally taught at the graduate level. And so drawing the bounds around what this class is going to cover. I mean, you both mentioned it. We're talking about sampling theory and talking about these other sort of discourse approaches, where it's a fine line between teasing those topics enough and to recognize the limitations of the research that you're having them conduct. Anybody else?
Yes, well, there's so much here that I don't even know where to begin. We had teams of researchers in SIS fanning out across the city to partner with community-based groups to try to assess to what extent they are helping to cultivate peace in the community, to de-escalate violence. And they didn't actually recognize, these community-based partners, that they had that role to play. They said, we're not a peace organization, but in the absence of their nonprofit, what would the neighborhood have looked like? So we had Mommies, which is a preschool, almost like a Head Start program, that actually helps teach peaceful parenting and ending child abuse in poor communities and neglect and whatnot. And so my students, they went through the certification as you recommended, and they went out and this was called Localizing Peace Initiative. This was way before Jane's program, and I wish that we had the benefit of all that she's doing. And I'm very curious how Jane's group then sought to propose solutions with the community-based research that they did. With their community partners, did they problem solve and propose policy solutions?
From what I know of the process, and I'm by no means an expert on it, but I've seen pieces of it along the way, that there are several meetings with the organizations throughout the process, and that it's formally what is being provided to them is a needs assessment of the community that they seek to serve. And so that there are, and essentially it's taking, after surveying the community that they're working with, it's then going and saying, they've identified X, Y, and Z needs, and after speaking to you about what you offer, right, these are the areas where you're not actually addressing their needs, and then
I see.
yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's largely done through the lens of a needs assessment.
Okay.
Because in that way, then they don't they don't step on the toes of saying what you should be doing is this.
No. Yeah,
right?
no.
Because it keeps that. It keeps that ability of to have a group of undergraduates come in and tell you how to do this.
Right.
Right.
No, we would never seek
Yeah.
to do that. Right. Well, eventually what we did was to convene all the groups we had surveyed, so they met each other, from Peaceaholics and the Alliance of Concerned Black Men down to the preschool people. And then they began to see that they were the social safety net, the peace web across DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and how they could possibly be greater than the sum of their parts and also lobby for greater funding from the district government and from Congress, which relates to another big project we have in SIS with Ray Chambers, which is to try and enact a 24-hour ceasefire from Baltimore to DC. Of course, not just 24 hours, but much longer than that. But I was struck by what you said, Aaron and Dick, that the limits of the data, you know, that for instance, I've collected peace education surveys from all over the world, research on how do you inoculate and vaccinate populations against hate, from Indonesia to Argentina to everywhere, you know, all over Africa. So I probably have the largest data collection of anywhere in the world of over the last 30 years, research, evaluation studies of peace education, where it has failed, where it has succeeded, and why. And you can't always determine if it worked. But just studying those evaluation tools and instruments, of course, they're all mixed methodologies. That people are comparing apples and oranges all over the place. It's sort of like a meta-analysis that my students are doing of peace education around the world. But you can't always say that it's definitive, because how you know, there's so many variables in the community that could affect the outcome of peace education programs. You know, with child soldiers, in refugee camps, with after-school programs, with former gang members. There's so many different kinds of peace education programs to reorient people away from violence.
Yeah, and I think there's you know, two really interesting parts of that. The first is this idea of being able to provide, because you're working with multiple different groups at the same time, have that sort of network building component of it that is in and of itself a community service, right? That aside from the responses that you're putting back to them, and it's you know, something I know CBRS works with, the entire cohort works with one organization a year, or one or possibly two organizations a year, and so it's something that, you know, I think now that it's been around a few years, there could be sort of a time to bring all of the different organizations they've worked with together.
Yes, that was part of our thinking, was coalition building.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other part of it is this idea that even without a specific you know, community group that you're working with, that you have access to it in the city, but this type of meta-analysis that is useful also to do the same sort of approach. Have students actually looking at the research that has been conducted by other people, and get a view of the field in that way from a methodological perspective, rather than just reading sort of the outcomes, but how did we ask these questions? How did we gather this data?
Right. It's not them conducting their own research as your students did, Aaron and Dick, but rather looking at other people's research, so it's not really the same way. You know, I'm struck that American University has inherited Airlie House, and our global environmental politics faculty really want to make that a sustainable community. And I said there are other sustainable nature centers in the Washington, Maryland, Virginia area. What if we all linked up into a web and created like a hub and tried to scale up and meet each other and do research around that way? So our global environmental faculty in SIS are very interested in pursuing that and trying to figure out ways that the students could also do research on this, trying to think of success stories. like the Alice Ferguson Center in Accokeek, Maryland, or the other wonderful one, Huntley Meadows down in Old Town Alexandria past there. How could we link up with all of these other nature centers that are trying to bring inner city kids to learn sustainable lifestyles, healthy living, and best practices in green.
And I think that goes into building sort of long-term partnerships and centers like that. I mean, it answers that question of what do we do post these individual classes when they develop these skills, right? And by developing something, sort of the long-term partnerships that students can flow in and out of, provides a way that these skills can be actively used beyond the individual class when they're developed.
In terms of internships and externships and things like that.
Yeah.
But also it's the role of a university to harness our intellectual firepower, if you will, to solve community problems. This is the town-gown relationship that we should see.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I'll point out one other thing I realized while these guys were talking, and all of our qualitative research software, both in vivo and Qualtrics, are also unique because they're available. The way we have the licenses, we can put them on students' computers. That makes them incredibly accessible compared to something like Stata or SPSS that they've got to use for the virtual computing lab. So just from my technical side, another pitch. These are very easy to integrate in the sense that students can take them home and be on their own laptops when they're working.
And don't have to go through virtual reality.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
All our programs are available to all students. It's just that they've got to go through a few steps, and you have to tell them, make sure you save everything, because when you sign off, when your map is gone, I can't tell you how many heartbreaks we've had. Oh, Lord.
I'm just struck by how labor-intensive these classes must be for you.
They're fun.
Yeah.
They're really fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you learn stuff.
Yeah.
23 variations of identity.
Yeah.
My God. I didn't know that.
There's a great issue of National Geographic on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it came out in May. May? No, earlier, possibly. No, May. It's called The Gender Revolution.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
have
it's
to get
really
it.
great.
I'll have to look at it. Yeah, great.
And it's still evolving, actually.
I'm sorry?
Different categories. And
Yeah, I mean,
different-
but
it's
I know
still
in space.
evolving, yeah.
Yeah. I was gonna say 30, so what is it, 15 weeks, so 30 odd class meetings, and I give maybe one lecture in this whole thing. Everything else is interactive, question and answer, working on projects, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's much more enjoyable to me at least.
Yeah.
In the verdict of proof, I gave 2 lectures in class. And then all the rest was done on Wednesdays in the labs.
But
So-
you had the discussion of the discourse analysis theory
And of things we
discussion.
read and things like that.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Not me telling them, yeah.
Yeah.
One lecture about the theory of background, but then they go and read it and we talk about it and start.
And they come back, they have to participate.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are going to tell me about how they're going to define fear of crime
Mhm.
and why they're selecting this as opposed to something else.